Hi, it's Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy. So, what are the risks and benefits of e-bikes? This is the easy part, talking about the benefits. E-bikes are fun. I don't know anybody who's been on an e-bike that didn't, they just say they put a smile on your face, and that's been my experience as well. But I think that beyond just being fun, a lot of people, a lot of real active cyclists get an e-bike simply to get on a bike after they've done their serious ride to have a fun, a ride in the morning, ride the e-bike in the afternoon, um, or keep the e-bike around for running errands. I live 3 miles from the office. I could easily ride an e-bike over here on days when I'm not seeing somebody. So got a lot of applications like that. And I had a story that Kati pulled for me this week about a guy who lost 105 pounds, totally changed his life using an e-bike. Remember, I've talked before about the fact that they had an apparent, they appear to be to other people less difficult to ride. So they have a lower barrier of entry for people to start exercising. So that's a really, really good benefit. Some studies are showing that maybe their heart rate is 8% lower than someone that's on a bike on average. Just saw a study today on that. Still, people who are riding them are typically in the moderate level of exercise. So that's a very good thing, particularly someone who is otherwise not exercising at all. They definitely have advantages over of a barrier of entry, rather, in terms of getting people on a bicycle, which I think is great. They definitely aid in our carbon footprint. Saw data that 2018 was the worst year on record for carbon emissions. And I'm really believe and hopeful, honestly, that e-bikes will change our habits in terms of getting around. Wouldn't it be great if the United States was Denmark in terms of the availability and use of e-bikes and bicycles? And so all of those automobile trips would be eliminated, millions and millions of automobile trips replaced by bicycles and e-bikes. It would be unbelievable and have a tremendous impact on our environment, which we critically need right now. So let me see, weight loss. Yeah. The thing that what e-bikes do, there's a lot of use for them for people who, maybe they've gotten dinged with a health issue. They can't keep up with their buds or their friends or their spouse, and they want to ride together. They're concerned they might not make it back on the length of a long ride. All those things are positives and are reasons why e-bikes continue to be hot sellers. So looking now at some of the risks, and let me preface my comments by this. I am an e-bike supporter, so I don't want anyone to ever misinterpret something that I say as being critical of e-bikes or being critical of riders. I had a comment recently about that. Someone said, now you're blaming the rider. And I said, never, I don't do that. So just put that into its context. But, bicycling on an e-bike is different than riding on a regular bike. And there are some things to keep in mind. I think one of the things, I had a comment this week from someone who's a follower of our program, sent me a message saying, hey, listen, what he had observed riding his e-bike was that it's the drivers, in his view, weren't aware of how quickly he was closing on them. So the classic example is a driver passes you, and they're in the car, you're doing 18 or 20, and they don't realize you're doing that fast. They want to turn right, and suddenly you're on them again. Drivers misinterpret how fast we're going. And I think this is complicated by the fact that many people on e-bikes are riding in a pretty upright position. They've got like the regular bicycle look, not a carbon fiber type serious cycling bike. And when you watch their pedal motion, it's very slow, very moderate in terms of how fast they're going. I've been going, 18 miles an hour on Gulf Boulevard in here and get passed by this nice little lady on an e-bike, and she's doing 20, and it looks like she's doing 10 the way she's pedaling, but she just goes on by. And I think that can contribute to drivers not recognizing that a person riding in that position, pedaling at that pedal speed, is going 20 miles an hour, or perhaps, class threes are legal, 28 miles an hour. Okay, so it's just something that we need to keep in mind, is that driver recognize how quickly I'm approaching or how I'm going to approach them when they pass me. Just keep that always in mind. We have to be hyper vigilant about these things. Do they know I'm here? Do they expect me to be there? I think one of the issues in terms of e-bikes too is you have a lot of people, particularly right now, this is being broadcast during the COVID issue. Bikes are selling like crazy, and that includes e-bikes. And you have people who really are not cyclists buying e-bikes. So you take a person who is not an experienced bicycle rider, and you give them an e-bike that goes 20 miles an hour. Well, if you were to buy a standard road bike as a non-cyclist, non-exerciser, you're not going to ride 20 miles an hour out of the chute for most people. They're going to work up to it. It takes exercise and time and energy to progress doing 15, 17, 18, 19, 20. You don't just get on the bike and zoom, you're doing 20. So things happen more quickly at 20 than they do at 14. And I wonder if inexperienced riders appreciate what to anticipate in terms of things that are occurring on the road around them. You're approaching an intersection much more quickly. The person coming out on the right, you're coming upon them much more quickly. Things are in the road that you're going to have to avoid at 20 potentially rather than going 14. So I think there's that issue, and that's just, I guess I would call it lack of experience, lack of having been through the ins and outs of the things we run into on the road day in and day out, that a person may experience on an e-bike doing 20 miles an hour that they simply may not be prepared for. So you have to keep that in mind. The other thing is that e-bikes on sidewalks, we've talked about this once before, but that definitely is an issue. E-bikes commonly weigh 50 pounds, 60 pounds. Most bicycles weigh a third or half of that. And that's definitely something to keep in mind if in the presence of pedestrians, because more mass equals more injury if you tangle with someone who happens to get in your way. So that's something that we have to be constantly aware of. I've actually seen some pretty good data that indicates that cyclists on an e-bike are not riding faster on sidewalks than they were before, which is one of the things that we expressed some concern about in the past. It always comes down to the one person doing the one thing at the one time that a crash happens. But in general, the data I've seen so far is that e-bike riders are not riding more quickly than they would be. I think I have seen data that's sort of in general, e-bike riders ride 3 or 4 miles an hour faster from point A to point B. But part of that is because when they get to a hill, if they're doing 18, they can go up the hill at 18. They're not slowing down to 6 or 8 or something. So they get to the end destination more quickly, even though they may not be riding faster the entire way, which is a very interesting thing. I don't know if you've been going up a hill and be passed by an e-bike rider, but it's very interesting how little effort they seem to be exerting. If you're going up in my area, going over a bridge or up in the central part of the state, going up these hills, and how they just kind of come floating past you. It's kind of cool. I saw something very fascinating having to do with issues with e-bikes and older riders, and that was what they were calling dismount injuries. There is an issue with some older riders losing their balance getting on and off the e-bike. I don't understand. They didn't give the particulars of why that is or how the injuries occur, other than the bike being 50 or 60 pounds and maybe falling on them, or them hitting the ground with the bike falling on them as well. So something that I'll be on the lookout for, but something to keep in mind for people if you're selecting an e-bike. I've talked before about the experience that I've had with bike shop owners who talk about older riders, very incapacitated riders coming in, getting an e-bike and totally changing their life by just getting out, getting active, getting more active, and having a life that they haven't had since they were unable to drive. I think that one of the things, e-bikes are being purchased by people who don't have a history with cycling, like I said before, and they may not be aware of the visibility issues, what I talk about all the time. Are you wearing high visibility clothing? Are you wearing a helmet? The other thing is lane position, so critical. It's a bicycle. You're going to ride in the road. Lane position, taking the lane. When do you do it? When's it safe to do it? Riding as far to the right as practical does not mean hugging the curb. It means being far enough off the curb so that the vehicles see you and have to go around you somewhat. So these are things that I hope that e-bike riders will come to understand, get information from Cycling Savvy or other people who have it, our own website, to understand the critical importance of lane position in terms of riding an e-bike safely, not to mention lights and helmets and those kinds of things. Drop my note card. I have one thing I'll mention. I'm a little unsure whether to mention it. I'm going to say it because Kati pulled a study, and it was a very short, page and a half, just had it this week, by the largest insurance company in Europe. And I haven't seen any other data like this. The data that I have seen from Europe and the United States is really there is no significant difference between e-bike injuries versus bicycle injuries. But this is sort of an outlier. And this is from the largest health insurance company in Europe. And they're saying there's a 3-fold increase in deaths by riders of e-bikes. But they don't understand, they don't explain why. They don't give us enough data to understand it. So I'm only going to mention it in passing. I don't know much more than that. I'm certainly not certifying or trying to imply that it's accurate. Most of it still comes down to, our responsibility, the driver's responsibility, and us being super careful as we are always called to be. So, I'm looking to buy an e-bike. I want to ride one. I'm taking my time. I've got other issues I'm dealing with right now. So, but I'm sort of scanning the horizon as to what I will end up getting, and I'll be happy to talk about that. And I think maybe we'll do a program one time about what are the choices out there and what are the pros and cons. There's a huge variety right now from $1,000, to the super expensive e-bikes. So what are you getting with increased cost? What are the trade-offs? I think that'd be an interesting conversation. So I hope you found this interesting. I'm Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy, e-bike supporter, bike supporter. I represent cyclists across Florida, whether you've been injured in a bike crash or as a passenger or driver of an automobile. If you need me, call me. I'll be there for you. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Take care. Bye.